Hello, I'm Tyler Griffin. I'm the Vice President of the Winthrop College Republicans.
And my name is Leslie Lovett, the Secretary of Affairs of Winthrop College Republicans.
And today we have our first interview ever with the former chairman of the York County Republican Party, Wes Climer, who has just recently defeated a 30-year incumbent in a state senate race. So, hello, Mr. Climer. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Mr. Climer, like Tyler just said, you defeated a 30-year incumbent.
Mm-hmm.
A guy who was just chairman of the York County Republican Party, and he came in and defeated a 30-year incumbent. My question is, who are you?
Oh, all right. Well, I grew up in Rock Hill. About 2 or 3 miles down the road is my granddad's old hardware store, Mallard Hardware. So I grew up working in that hardware store. I'm a financial advisor now. Help people plan for retirement, manage their investments, make sure their families have enough money to send their kids to college. And my wife Marty and I have 3 children. They are 5, 3, and 1, and then we're having a 4th child the due date is in 9 days.
Well, congratulations.
Thanks. And we live, I live maybe a quarter of a mile that way.
Okay.
I live sandwiched in between Winthrop's campus and the Coliseum, so I stay pretty attuned to what you guys are up to at Winthrop.
All right.
Now your kids have a place to go to college. You can just
That's right. Walk us through.
Yeah.
So, what made you decide to run? Because you were the chairman for the York Party for a few years, and then
Yeah.
you've been watching politics for a while. What made you decide to finally step in and run in a race?
So, when I was chairman of the York County Republican Party, part of that job involved paying pretty close attention to what's going on in local government, at school boards, the county council, and the state legislature. And the more attention I paid to what was going on in Columbia, the more frustrated I became. For a perfect example of this is the roads debate. You know, we are over a decade into a catastrophic failure of our transportation infrastructure. It makes it harder for us to recruit business, which means it's hard for people to get jobs. Our citizens sit in traffic jams, they drive over potholes, and the legislature has debated a roads bill for 3 consecutive sessions without really doing anything. And so at some point, you reach the conclusion that something's got to give. And in the legislative chamber, if things are not working well, then the problem is one of personnel. And so I decided to run because I think we can do things in a better way. And anyway, now I kind of feel like the dog that caught the car by the tire. Got to go out there and do it. But it's really a great blessing. It's a pretty humbling thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of responsibility, and I just pray every day that I do it well and do it right.
It's amazing that you learn our political classes. It's so rare for an incumbent to really lose in a re-election bid. It's either they just stop running,
Yeah.
or they're term limited, as the case in governors. So I remember watching the results coming in. It was like 51%, 50. It was like, was that stressful on you?
Oh, that was a very intense evening. Yeah, well, we have at each of the polling locations, the folks who staff the polls post the vote return on the door of the polling location, and then they drive the box over to the voter registration office or elections office over in York.
Yeah.
And so, the idea is that the numbers need to match,
Uh-huh.
right? So there's no malfeasance en route. And so we send people out to all the polling locations. And before the county had the results up on the website, we knew we'd won.
Mm-hmm.
There was a 300 plus vote margin throughout, and with 1 precinct left where we had not sent someone. So we had to send somebody from my house to drive 20 minutes out to the last precinct, and then he texted us the results, and that text message, that image is now hanging in a frame in my house.
That's great.
Yeah.
That is how it's done. There's a rise in the number of term limit
Yeah.
senators coming into the General Assembly this year, and you bring one of your standpoints where you bring pro-term limit.
Sure, yeah.
What is a way, or how would you introduce or propose legislation for term limits?
Well, I will they call it pre-file. I will pre-file legislation to create term limits. In South Carolina, that's going to require a constitutional amendment. So the legislature will have to pass it, and then the citizens will have to weigh in. I suspect that if we're able to get it on the ballot, that's the kind of thing that will pass with 75, 80% of the vote. Ultimately, I think that a legislature works well when private citizens bring to bear on public policy the depth of their experience for a little bit of time, and then go home and go back to their private lives. I find it a bit, really repulsive that folks make a career out of politics. It's not supposed to be a career. It's supposed to be about public service. And so I suspect that given the turnover in the legislature over the last few years, that we stand a better chance of getting term limits through now than perhaps any time in recent memory. That's not to suggest that I think it will be easy. Will require a great deal of work, but you'll never get it done unless you never push the boulder all the way up the hill until you push it that first inch.
Right.
Yeah.
And the first step is introducing legislation, which I'll do on day one.
Right.
Great. What other issues are you passionate about besides term limits and roads?
So, at a kind of 40,000 foot view, and this is not an issue that's particularly flashy, but structural reform of state government. We have a deeply antiquated system of government that inhibits good public policy development and makes public policy implementation extremely difficult. And so an example of this is in the education system, where there is an elected state superintendent of education, a governor who always runs. I've never paid attention to a gubernatorial campaign that didn't involve a lot of conversation around education issues. There is a state board of education. There is an education oversight committee, and then there is a commission on higher education. And so within and then there are two chambers of the legislature. So
A lot of red tape.
there are a lot of intersections, a lot of stoplights on the way to fixing our schools. And if we're able to streamline this process, make it a sensible process, you'd have a much better chance of achieving reform in our education system. Or we're stuck with the status quo where all we ever do is talk about education reform and it never happens.
Right.
And I use the example of the education system because it's a pretty glaring example and people tend to be familiar with it, but that kind of system is present throughout our government. It exists in the transportation system, it exists across the board, and chipping away at this antiquated system of government is a precondition. I mean, it is absolutely mandatory in order to move South Carolina along into the 21st century. Another thing that I have a lot of passion for are questions of poverty, and in particular questions of affordable housing and the criminal justice system. I think, for example, if you can prevent someone from becoming homeless, you keep that person off the street. Not only is that good for the person who's not on the street, they're able to go out and keep a job and keep a roof over the head for their children and have some stability in their lives. But if you wind up on the street, the odds of you getting stopped by the police is really high. It leads to a lot of pathologies that are really not conducive to a stable life and holding a job down and so on and so forth. And so, if you lose your home, you're going to wind up on the streets. You likely wind up in jail, which makes it harder for you to get a job in the future. And so it's sort of this downward spiral that can be prevented with some changes in the way we approach housing. And I don't approach it from the same way that, say, Lyndon Johnson would have. I don't think this is a question of throwing money around. I think it's a question of changing the tax structure, the regulatory structure to lower the price of housing stock. It's a question of financial counseling, helping people stand up on their own right, helping people to achieve in their own right. But there are some really sensible things we can do to help folks get a home, stay in a home, raise their children in a stable environment that will pay tremendous dividends, not only for the budget, right, which is not an insignificant thing, but also for the broader cause of human flourishing. I mean, allowing people, creating opportunities for people to live up to their potential. Nobody wants to live on the streets. It's not a choice for people. And I think there are some fiscally responsible things we can do to help people in need. And then within the prison system is another example, right? At the federal level, at the state level, local level, our prisons simply operate as warehouses. I can't remember who said this, but a petty criminal will enter a jail for a 3-year prison sentence or something and leave with a postdoctoral degree in being a criminal.
Yeah.
Right?
They get stuck in the system.
They get stuck in the system. They are surrounded by criminals. They don't get, our prison system is designed more for warehousing than it is for remedial activity, for teaching people skills. And I know, for example, in Texas, Texas has pursued some pretty innovative programs that involve now I'm not talking about violent criminals. I'm not talking about people who murder and rape and do awful things.
Yeah.
We're talking about petty criminals who might have pickpocketed somebody or something like that. I mean, they've done bad stuff. They need to be punished for it. They need to pay their debt to society. But when they get out of jail, it's going to be pretty tough to get a job.
Right.
And therefore, they're going to wind up hanging around the exact same people who got them in jail in the first place. And so, an alternative to that cycle of imprisonment is what I mentioned Texas has pursued, where they've spent time teaching nonviolent inmates how to run a lawn care business, how to run a plumbing business, how to run a roofing business. And then when they get out of prison, they have an opportunity, a much lower recidivism rate for inmates who have gone through this system, because they have an alternative to going back to a life of crime.
Yeah.
They have an option of achieving something for themselves and their families that doesn't involve selling drugs and stealing stuff.
Yeah.
And so, we spend $38,000, $40,000 a year per inmate. And if we're reallocating some of that money towards rehabilitation as opposed to the next cycle of imprisonment, really makes a whole lot of sense, both for the budget and for the husbands, the fathers, the brothers and sisters who are trapped in these cycles.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So now we can get past the serious political stuff. Get to some more light stuff.
Okay.
So you were an intern for a congressman when you were, I said you're already young, so I'm not going to say younger, but how is that like? You become a actual state senator when you were an intern at one point. So what's that like? That feeling?
So I was my last semester in college. I had an internship with a congressman from North Carolina, and at the end of the internship, which is when I was then finished with college, he said, "Why don't you stay on and work for me?" So I did, and I ended up working for him, and then moved over to the Senate side for a little bit of time, and then came back and worked for another member of the House for a couple years, and I helped. My job on the staff was press secretary and communications director, and so that involves writing speeches and press releases and preparing for interviews and stuff like that. So you go kind of a mile wide on policy, because you have to be fluent in a lot of subjects in order to communicate well the boss's position
Mhm.
on things. And so what I found in this campaign was that after having you know, written a lot of speeches and articles and press releases for somebody else, it is a very different thing to do that for yourself.
Because now you're the boss.
Right. And it was a little disconcerting at first. But it, you know, one of the things that was very important to me in this campaign that I think is lost a lot in politics is that, and I spent a lot of time over at the chapel at Westminster praying about this, and is that I wanted the campaign to win or lose.
Mhm.
I wanted our words and our actions and the way we interacted with voters and the way we interacted with our opponent, to reflect well on Christ's injunctive to us to treat people well, to do it honorably, and let our campaign serve as an example of what politics ought to be, instead of the, you know, mudslinging nastiness that so often comes to characterize, you know, political campaigns. And so, you know, we didn't shy away from drawing contrasts on issues, on votes, on positions where my opponent and I would have gone a different direction. But in everything I said and in everything we wrote, we were very careful and very intentional to try to do it the right way.
Leslie and I were both there at your debate, and that was compared to some other debates we've seen on television. I mean, that was a phenomenal debate. You guys are both very polite to each other, and even when Governor Nikki Haley endorsed you, you two still had really nothing negative to say about your opponents. I mean, it was very refreshing to see an election like that.
Yeah. Well, it's not a hard thing for me to say. You know, Mr. Hayes is a phenomenal man. I mean, he's a gentleman. I think he, you know, gave good, honest, well-meaning service to his community at significant personal cost for 30 years. And although he and I disagree on a number of issues, and that's why I ran, that does not mean in any way, shape, or form that I don't hold him in extremely high regard. So, you know, the message of the campaign and what I said on the debate stage is, again, completely consistent with what I believe about the man. Now, even if I didn't think so highly of Mr. Hayes, which I do, I still wouldn't have gone down that road of vitriol and negative campaigning, but certainly made it easier on us that he is a good man.
Yeah.
That was good. That was good, Mr. Senator. What is something about you that no one knows? That very few people know.
I'm sure his wife knows, but
Yeah, Marty knows. It's not her favorite thing about me, but I rarely miss a Saturday during dove season. And a lot of times, matter of fact, most of the time, I go out by myself and enjoy just sitting in a field and having the space and the time to think, and then occasionally stand up and fire a shotgun, which is a pretty enjoyable way to spend it.
Yeah. It's Saturday.
Right.
So, going back to your time in college, what college did you go to?
I went to Furman.
Okay. You enjoy it?
Well, I loved Furman, and had some really great professors who I still keep up with from time to time. Furman, you know, being in Greenville, was a pretty nice place. I had a part-time job the whole way through college at the Mass General Store, which is they sell all kinds of odds and ends, but I sold tents and backpacks and hiking boots and stuff like that. And so it was just from on the academic side and on the personal side and the professional side, it was a great experience. And I think there are a lot of things going on in Greenville that would be wonderful to emulate and bring back to this community in York County. And hopefully we can get some of that done.
Now, what were you like in college? Were you conservative? Were you more liberal? Did you have
long
hair, long beard?
Routinely persona non grata in political science
Uh-huh.
classes. I've been conservative from a really young age, and that stems from when I was just I don't remember how old I was when this started, but I used to go visit with my grandmother all the time, and she and I would sit and watch the news and talk about the news. And I think obviously there are those who will disagree with this, but if you pay any attention to the long arc of history and basic economics, it is difficult not to be a conservative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so.
We found our way here, so.
Right, yeah.
I'd like to say just one last message to voters, especially millennials. What would you say to voters? I mean, this is a tough election season. You're hearing a lot of different rhetoric. So, I mean, what's your message, not just to millennials, just all range of voters, if you could just.
Especially ones who feel like their vote doesn't matter. You have a lot of people who said, "Oh, I would vote, but my vote doesn't matter anyway." And you're someone who beat a 30-year incumbent, so the vote does matter.
351
By
votes.
351 votes.
Every vote counts.
Every vote counts.
Every vote counts. One of the things that I wish people paid more attention to is local elections, county council elections, city council elections, school board elections, state legislative races. In a lot of those contests, they're decided by a couple hundred votes.
Right.
And out of a pool of maybe 5,000 voters. And so if you want to make a big difference in the quality of your life and in the quality of your community, the way you live day to day, you can have a huge impact by getting involved at the local level. And then of course in presidential elections and congressional elections, they typically don't suffer from a lack of turnout, simply because both the candidates and everybody, all these outside groups will spend billions on TV ads, which kind of reminds people to go vote.
All right.
But in local elections in particular, your vote has an outsized impact. And I'd encourage anybody who cares about their community to get involved at the local level, because you can make a huge difference, even with a single vote.
That's great. Thank you very much. We appreciate you having me on the show. You're the very first interview. This is a historic moment.
I do okay?
Yeah, you did
All
great.
right.
It was excellent. This is CNN quality
Right.
interview, or Fox News quality. Whichever one you watch. But this is our first interview. We got a lot more coming up, but you're setting the bar very high for everybody else.
Well, y'all, thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.
Look forward to catching up with you
It's
soon.
not a
It's great having you.
Thank you, Mr.
Pleasure.
Climer.
Good to see you.
Yes.